I don't think we're going to see the big software vendors get kicked out. I think it's going to be these other little tools that do limited things that are maybe not so mission critical.
Cost them a lot of money in market value. Cost them what, almost $300 billion in lost market value in a day? Hey, David.
Peter, how are you
today? I am good. I am still warm.
I'm
Very
still
warm.
cold, but there's no more piles of snow on the ground, so I had to change my background so it wasn't piles of snow. Now it's embrace the future, AI.
Well, I think that's valid. I like your replacement. In fact, I probably should have done the same thing. But you know what? We'll go with the nice, sunny Miami background for now.
I'm still jealous, even though I did just learn that it's going to be relatively warm here in New York next week, so I guess that's good. Hard to believe it's March already, and it's been a crazy few weeks of AI news, right?
So I got a crazy one. It's daylight savings time this weekend.
Wow, I had no idea. Okay.
I didn't either until I looked at my calendar and I'll pops daylight savings time. I'm like, whoa, God, wasn't expecting that one.
Hasn't it been at least a few decades now that they've been talking about daylight savings time being obsolete and they want to get rid of it? But yet we don't seem to be able to do it.
We seem to make no headway on that, even though I think they should get rid of it. And I know they condensed it quite a bit a number of years ago, so which is why now it's the beginning of March. Like I think it used to be in April or something like that. I forget.
Interesting.
Like I said, I get rid of it. But anyway,
good.
Back to the world
I've got
reality.
I've got my cup of coffee ready, and we're going to talk about.
Ditto. There's mine too.
Perfect. So I love this topic today because people have been talking about this a lot the last couple of weeks. People are talking about the SaaS-pocalypse.
Yes.
And I guess it's, our software as a service company is going to be wiped out by AI. So we're going to break that down, right? That's our topic for the day.
I think that is a great topic to talk about and one that highly relevant. And I think let's start with what triggered this, because I think it was a massive one-day drop with all these SaaS companies. So it wasn't like a blog post or something on the Claude website, the Anthropic website.
Yeah, I think this blog post that came out was sort of it was the straw that broke the camel's back in a way, right? Because there had been a lot of other people talking about making blog posts and sharing stories about how they created their own apps that would do the same thing as software as a service apps, and so people were starting to pay attention. And then there was a day or two when a couple of other people came out and said, "Oh, I just replaced my Salesforce.com solution or my pick some large software vendor solution," and that was like that just got everyone talking about this, right? And it did cause a drop in some software company stocks.
No, I know. I remember that day when it happened, and all of a sudden everybody's talking about like the end of time. All these SaaS companies are going to go out of business and be replaced by AI. But let's kind of dig into that a little bit because, I'm like you, we've been around the block probably too many times. But
let's do that. Let's even start with what is SaaS, because I think it's not an acronym that everyone uses. For those of you who are following along at home, it is SaaS, not SAS, and not
different
SASS.
Meanings.
Right, yeah.
Right. Yes, all different meanings, very different meanings.
So, Peter, let's start with what is software as a service? That's SaaS is software as a service. What is that? What's that all about?
It's precisely that. It's software that a company will typically buy to potentially solve a particular problem, but it runs as a service. It doesn't run in your environment. It runs in their own cloud environment, typically. You're sharing it with other companies so that you're getting the benefit of all the sharing and you don't have to spin up your own hardware. Whereas traditionally, when we had applications, we would run them in our own data center. So I would deploy on my hardware in my data center. I'd have to manage it, run it, productionize it, do all that kind of stuff I no longer have to do.
Right, and that stuff that you're running in your data center, sometimes you would custom develop it, sometimes you would license it, but you would still, to your point, you would install it, configure it, run it in your data center. So the promise of software as a service was what? You could get up and running faster, you didn't have to spend time and money on hardware and configuration.
And people. And you get the benefit of continuous upgrades. So they theoretically are always updating the software. You just get the benefits of that. You get the benefits of them, again, monitoring it 24/7, making sure it's up and running all the time. When they have updates, you typically just get those automatically. The downside is you're paying a monthly fee for all of this, whether you're using it or not. And you always have that recurring cost sitting there. It never kind of goes away.
You never really own it.
No, you don't actually. You never really own the software. You're basically renting it. So it's been a very common model for a number of years, especially for domains or problems that are across all industries, like HR being a classic one. Having an HR platform that everybody shares and all uses the same platform. And there's no need to have a custom HR platform because it's all the same stuff anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. And so some of the big software as a service vendors out there in the HR space, there's companies like Workday,
Right.
Salesforce, which is
Salesforce, right.
far bigger than just, they used to be called Salesforce.com, and they were a customer relationship management system. Now they're a much broader application.
Right.
ServiceNow is another great example that we run into a lot.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Workday. There's a bunch of them out there that are actually very common that are used pretty much no matter where you go, you're going to find one of these applications. So when this article came out,
and let's also say, by the way, that a lot of companies, if you're a smaller company, software as a service might be the only software you run, right? So
yes,
I could go in and
point.
I could sign up for QuickBooks or QuickBooks for my accounting software. I could sign up for an HR onboarding software. I could sign up for Slack. I could sign up for G Suite from Google, et cetera, and I literally could run without operating my own data center. And in fact, many companies out there run nothing but software as a service today.
Right, exactly. And I think just to borrow from the pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, go for it.
Go right ahead. I'm sorry. Oh, so I think you very often see this in the small pharmaceutical space where all the applications that they're running are SaaS solutions. They are not developed internally.
Right. No, I think more and more when you talk about the technology stack at a lot of, especially small to mid-sized companies, it's virtually 100% software as a service. What I was going to ask you about is I'd love to dive in a little bit to like where this came from, because in my mind, this was a newer, better delivery mechanism for what we used to call ERP software, like SAP and some of those systems back in the old days.
Right.
And I don't know if you remember, but the customization, you just nailed it. That was the pain. That you would get this software and you would customize it, and it was costing. It wasn't uncommon for me back in the 90s and early 2000s to talk to clients who had literally spent more on the software customization than they had on the initial purchase of the software. And then when a new major release of that software came out, they had to spend that much all over again to re-customize the base package.
And what that typically led to is then skipping releases. And you'd find, 5 releases later, they're like, oh, we need to actually now upgrade. And the cost has gone up dramatically, not only because of the cost of the software, but the migration path now became extraordinarily complex because especially ERP, which are incredibly complex systems. So it could take you a year to do an upgrade. Yeah. And it was always rife with problems if you have a lot of users, using the system.
And the other thing that was happening is people were shoehorning their business processes into these software packages where they decided not to spend the money to customize. They would just sort of try to customize the process instead.
Yeah. I worked at a company like that, and their whole thing was customizing the software to fit their existing very broken processes. And what they could have done in a month or so, literally, they were still working on for 2 years and had not fully deployed it.
Yeah, I have horror stories in my brain about being at clients where, they would have these crazy hoops they jump through because of the way they were trying not to customize the software. So they'd be like, okay, well, we're going to use the build to address for this and the ship to address for that, unless this happens, in which case you need to go into this type of addendum note and look for what's really the ship to address, and, all these crazy workarounds.
No, it was ugly, and it cost companies a fortune. And they're spending how many people are on these projects. Like even one of my old companies, I cannot begin to tell you how many people were involved in the project. It was a large number of people. And it made no sense because the problem they were trying to solve was a problem that had been solved 100 times. And you're taking a 20-year-old process and you're bolting it onto a new system. And it was like, I don't know, why are you doing this? It doesn't make any rational sense. It's costing you a fortune.
It also, in my mind, severely compromised the data assets of those companies, because now you had,
without a doubt,
data that you had shoehorned into a schema or a database structure. The database structure said the data should mean this, but the way you actually were using it was something entirely different. And it meant that it was incredibly hard for people to get analytics and reports and information out of these systems.
So the companies got around this usually one of two ways. They would overload, or not even, they would overload existing columns, and which always drove me absolutely insane because you never knew it was in a column. Or they'd have columns labeled value 1, value 2, value 3 through value 50 that would just use them however you want, and there was some text value fields, and they would do that. Or worse, and I'd seen this plenty of times too, is they would have the traditional 1 or 3 column type length value type of schema where everything was and it was, you have these very, very, very large tables that were very long and very narrow, which made them also ridiculously problematic. So nothing good ever came out of it.
My inner data architect is sobbing when you say that, but yes.
I would twitch when I used to see this stuff. I'd start twitching. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I can't believe we actually did this. And I understand why they did it, but it was incredibly inefficient.
Painful. So,
yes.
Okay, as the move, so obviously, the cloud came along, and really it was cloud computing that enabled software as a service to be a product that you could get.
Yes.
Cloud comes along, and some of the vendors who were previously selling installed software, as well as a whole bunch of other vendors, created new software as a service offerings. How much do you think they really, what of the problems of traditional ERP packages, which I should say is enterprise resource planning, that's what it stood for. How much of the problems did software as a service solve, and how many of those problems do you think persisted anyway?
I think they solved a lot of the problems. I mean, you're forcing now companies into a set pattern, which from an application developer's, from a software company standpoint, makes a lot of sense, because now you can continuously upgrade your applications and you roll them out to everybody and you get it free. So I think it was a good thing net for companies to be forced, especially for problems that are just everybody has the same problem. There's no reason to have a custom application to do this. So I think it did solve a lot of problems. And I think for smaller companies, it brought a suite of tools that they were never able going to run themselves. So now you brought very powerful enterprise class applications like PeopleSoft to smaller mom and pop shops, or the 100-person manufacturing company that didn't have the money to deploy their own either ERP or CRM system, whatever it was. I mean, I even look at us as a company. We use a lot of these tools that in the past we would have had to deploy ourselves.
Right. No, I think that's right. And it certainly brought a whole new class of tools to companies that wouldn't have afforded them before. What I think is maybe a more tricky situation is what happened to the idea of customization. So true customization went out the window, right? The vision of a software as a service company was, we're running one copy of the software for multiple tenants, but we're not writing you your own version for your company. And they replaced customization with configurability, which was in some ways better and worse, right? It was better because you weren't rewriting software code, and there would always be an upgrade path if you had just stayed within the boundaries of the software and configured it. But it was limiting. You couldn't always configure it to do everything you wanted it to do.
But it was the classic case. I'm making 90% of the people happy, and the other 10%, I'll maybe come up with a different solution. So it's fine. I think for most people, that's totally fine. You don't need to have a system that is infinitely customizable and really get under the covers and modify tables. Most companies just don't need that. It doesn't make any sense for them to do that.
So interesting question. I agree they don't need it, but I feel like a lot of them still wanted it, and that's maybe foreshadowing to what happened, what we're talking about today, because I think it definitely limited the amount of customization you could do. You couldn't really customize, you could configure.
Right, but at the end of the day, and I ask you, I don't know the answer to this, is that more of a want than a need in most cases? And I think sometimes I look at a lot of developers and they go, well, I only wish I can customize this further, but I really can't. Therefore, I need to do the following. And if you look, there's usually an alternative way of solving the problem they're trying to solve. They just don't want to take that path. And I don't know. Software developers, they love changing stuff.
Look, I think that whole want versus need distinction when we're talking about any sort of software customization is it's a great question to ask, because I think traditionally
Because,
we're very, very bad at deciding or distinguishing between want versus need when it comes to this stuff.
and I look at it this way: if I'm a small organization, what is it that I'm going to need that the 500 or 1,000 other companies that are using this service, what is it that I need that's so special? Like, why do I need this and they don't? And if you ask that question more often than not, the answer is, well, I don't really need it. I mean, I kind of want it, but I don't really need it. Maybe it's a nice to have. So I think it's kind of rejiggering or just changing how you perceive
Yeah,
some things more often than not.
I think that makes sense. So what's interesting about it to me is like, there's a lot of benefits, right? No upfront cost. You weren't spending money on hardware and data centers. You weren't hiring administrators. There was literally no upfront cost. You could just pay your first month's fee, and
Right. And you're done.
tomorrow the system would be alive and up and running. It was almost instantaneous. I mean, the longest part of it was probably how long it took you to type in a credit card number to the vendor website.
Exactly. And you and I have gone through the process of deploying these systems between setting them up and hook them into your internal systems and setting up DR and allocating hardware, which can take months to find a spot in a data center for. And, what typically would take maybe 6 months for a large system, now you could do it in a matter of, I don't want to say 10 minutes. I mean, exaggerating a little bit, but I mean, that's kind of what it is.
No, I mean, huge benefits. And I like the way you said it, which is it unlocked categories of software that previously companies of a certain size just never would have made the investment in and wouldn't have had.
Right. Right.
Well, let's talk about some of the challenges, because I think this starts to lay the groundwork for why people are predicting, the death or the decline of this industry. I think one of them is the licensing model, right? In the old school, you bought software and it was typically you paid an enterprise license, and as your company grew, you might have to put more storage and more compute behind it, but like you weren't paying more every time you hired a new employee.
Right. But you did pay maintenance. You paid usually a yearly maintenance associated with any of these packages. And usually that maintenance could have been up to 25% of the cost of the purchase itself.
Fair enough. But it was a fairly predictable fixed cost. And I think
Yes.
whether it's good or bad, the model is different for software as a service. It typically tends to be based on seats or users, right?
Right. And
So
I think from
every time you hire someone who needs access to the software, you're going to pay more for that software.
Right. And I think traditionally with the older style, when you were deploying it on-prem, you also had the ability to amortize or get the stuff off your books. So there was a good tax deduction that came along with it as well, which you don't get with a SaaS product.
Right,
Because
because
now
it's
I'm
not
taking hardware,
CapEx at all.
It's not CapEx at all. So I maybe have a 3-year retirement period or accelerated retirement of 2 periods for hardware, which I'm writing all this stuff off, along with all the people associated with managing it. So, there are significant tax benefits to running this stuff on-prem. It's just a nightmare and a headache. And I think, having a powerful package for a fraction of the cost, net winds up being, too beneficial.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that people do complain about, though, with SaaS is that cost goes up and up and up as they grow and hire people. And, it seems like it never ends. You pointed out that there's no capital expenditure deductions on this. It's all OpEx that they're spending. And I think the other is there's sort of this notion of, like, if you're getting new features added to the software, they're new features that the software vendor decided based on feedback from their entire body of customers, and it may not matter to you. So you might not be getting the features you want, and you might be getting features you don't care about, and there's not that direct feedback loop between what you want and what you get.
Right. No, I 100% agree. It is a trade-off that you're going to make. And then the counter argument to that is that's fine because they're going to support it. I don't have to deal with upgrading a version at some point in the future, which doesn't contain that feature, and I have to migrate all the code over to the new platform.
Right. The biggest one for me is integration. So, I know people initially complained about having to sort of adapt their business model to the software. I agree with you. I kind of think that a lot of that is a tempest in a teapot that, like, people get confused between what they want and what they need. But here's the part that always, I think, struck me as very challenging. If, like any modern company, I'm running my business on 10 or 12 different software as a service packages, it's going to be rare for them to have direct integrations across those packages. And so a typical IT department spends most of their time stitching together data coming out of one into another, out of this one into that one, or extracting data from multiple and trying to blend it together to create reports. So just that sort of integration and data integration across multiple systems has always been a challenge.
Yes, 100%. And that challenge, if you're running it on-prem, is greatly diminished since you own all the data.
Right, exactly. And if you're on-prem, you have some degree of control over the schema, the data structure of that data. Whereas,
right.
Yeah.
And you have easier access to your own information. There are plenty of vendors out there that make it difficult for you to get your information out of the platform. It's not in their best interest for you to get off the platform. And I think they want to keep you there. They want to keep you billing, and they'll very often provide an API, or you have to go to their help desk or whatever it may be and get a dump of all your information. And it's honestly a pain in the neck.
Yeah, and SaaS is. I don't know. I don't have the numbers on this, but I fully believe SaaS is the dominant software distribution model in the world today. I think.
Oh, absolutely.
It's hard to imagine anyone who still ships you CDs or has you download something to install locally when it's usually software as a service.
CDs are like rotary phones. You just don't see them anymore.
Hey, I even remember when we used to get boxes of tapes to install software on the mainframe.
I remember those days. Yes, we were dating ourselves,
Yep.
David.
Yep.
But I remember, hey, look, I'll really date myself. Let's go off on a tangent for a second. I remember the card readers in college.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. All right, so all this time, software as a service is a growing business. It's the model everyone likes or tolerates at least. And in the background, here comes AI, and specifically AI code generation. And you and I have trash-talked the idea of vibe coding a few times, but vibe coding isn't all there is, right? And you've had some great experiences with, not vibe coding, but using AI like a professional software engineer would to enhance your productivity, I guess we'll say. So let's talk about what can you do today with AI code generation? Because this is a big part of the conversation is the state of the art keeps advancing and we've hit this inflection point. Talk about how capable it is today. Yeah.
It's frighteningly capable. Look, just to put some of this in perspective, my background is writing real-time trading systems. So we're writing tight code, fast code that had to run across the globe and process, literally trillions of dollars in transactions. It was important to get it right. So that's kind of where I'm coming from on all of this. And, I've been doing that stuff for decades. And now I look at these.
So you set the bar high for reliability, for speed, for efficiency of code.
Exactly.
You've got a pretty high
I wasn't sitting here writing basic web apps to capture your contact information. I was writing the real stuff. And, I look at these tools and look, there's always going to be a segment that I wouldn't use them for, not yet at least. But for doing some pretty powerful applications, and I've done some pretty powerful stuff with them, I have to tell you, they're an absolute game changer. But, and I will caveat all of this, I'm somebody with a lot of experience. Now, I wouldn't give this to a new guy who's starting out, who knows nothing about, recoverability or database transactions or how do I build up a DR site or deploying this in the cloud, like all that kind of stuff that goes along with building a professional application. That's knowledge that I have because I've done it. But somebody who just has access to, Claude Code or, OpenAI's Codex or one of the other ones out there doesn't know what they don't know. So,
let me make sure we get a pin in this. You're saying, and tell me if I have this right, you're saying that in the hands of a skilled, experienced software engineer, you can create some pretty amazing software at a pretty quick rate using these tools.
Yes, and you've seen some of the results of what I've created in an incredibly fast rate. And we've spoken about this before in some of the classes that we've taught, that being able to write code that otherwise would have taken me 6 months, and this is C and C++ code, so it wasn't even Python. I wrote stuff using these tools in a matter of, give me a week if it was even that long.
That's crazy.
And these are applications that are, I think, quite, I wouldn't say powerful, but it would have taken me anywhere from 4 to 6 months to probably do, given the level of detail I was getting into.
I don't think we would have said that a year ago, would we?
No.
I think a year ago people were talking about vibe coding or just starting to, but we would not have said you could create sophisticated applications a year ago.
Well, and it's funny though. I saw this coming. I remember I was working at a firm and I met this bunch of data engineers working for me, and OpenAI first came out with ChatGPT, and we started playing with it. And I remember taking some of the code that was deployed to run on one of the distributed data tools. Right? It was I forget the name of it. Not Cloudera. I forget the name of it, but whatever. Databricks. It was deployed on Databricks, and the code wasn't running well, so I basically took it and I put it into ChatGPT, and this was ChatGPT 3, and ran it through ChatGPT, and I said, look, optimize this code, and did a better job than the developer did. And it took me all 5 minutes. So I knew it was coming. I knew this was inevitable, and it was just a matter of time. And I specifically told him, I'm like, look, your careers are going to be short unless you start rethinking just rethinking it, period. Because this stuff is going to get incredibly powerful, incredibly fast, and it exceeded anything I thought was actually going to happen.
Crazy. All right, let me add another layer to this conversation. So first place around what AI can do, you're saying AI in the hands of a skilled developer can create really complex applications. Got it.
Yes.
Here's the other flip side that fascinates me. A few years ago, when I was part of planning a large cloud migration for a global bank, we had over 6,000 applications that were potentially in scope to migrate. And we started digging into what each of those applications did. We were going out and gathering data on all those applications. As a side note, what wouldn't I have given to have had generative AI to help gather that data?
Because I'm sure it'd been so much better.
We were looking up in databases and reading documents, and it was horrible, right? Well, it was actually horrible for the hundreds of consultants that we hired to do all this stuff, but it was still expensive and painful. Anyway, so we're doing this, and one of the things that jumped out at me is, of those over 6,000 applications, a shocking percentage of them were important. They had to run, but they were run 4 times a year. Maybe they were quarterly. Some of them were run once or twice a year. They were used by a few hundred people, actively used by a few hundred people. They didn't do anything complicated, but they were necessary. They were systems that, for example, keep track of who has gone on and re-attested that they have the correct permissions to various applications and file shares, right? It's a regulatory requirement, but technically, it's a really easy thing to do. It's just a little record-keeping application.
Yeah, it's all it is.
So my premise is a lot of companies have core applications that are really hard and have to be really good, but then they're also got this constellation of second-tier applications that do relatively simple things, don't have any complex requirements, either functional or non-functional requirements, and honestly, I hate that I'm saying this, but you honestly could probably vibe code some of those because they're just not very challenging. Right?
The basic stuff that you could probably do in an afternoon.
So you've got this mix now where, okay, I could bang out the basic stuff with a smart analyst who doesn't have great coding experience, and I could probably accelerate the creation of really strong software with a handful of great software engineers who know how to use these AI tools. Either way, you're now saying that I could create the suite of software that my company wants with far less cost and effort than I ever could have done before. I mean, it's kind of crazy if you think about it.
It is kind of crazy if you think about it, but with that creation of code comes other stuff, and that's what you think goes unspoken about. It's the maintenance, it's the management, it's the upkeep, it's the managing it in the cloud, it's all the other work that you have to include and the cost of managing all that stuff. So, and that's what goes, I think, unsaid. So you're not going to replace, a CRM system with somebody sitting in the office and, vibe coding for 2 weeks. And it's just never going to it doesn't make any practical sense. I still think the cost benefit ratio is just not there quite yet. And then you're now dealing with, again, you're dealing with an application that's custom to your business. And in some cases that makes sense, but does it need to be that? Do I really need to go out and replace a CRM to my old CRM? Because now I got to deal with that. I got to maintain that. And that's a lot of money.
So that's exactly, let's talk about that. That's exactly what has popped onto the scene in the last month, right? This whole idea of the SaaS-pocalypse has been, someone started tweeting and everyone started repeating this notion that maybe SaaS companies were doomed because now you could go hire 1 or 2 software engineers, and software engineers plus some vibe coding, you could create all your own custom software, and you didn't need software as a service companies. You didn't need to pay by the seat. Right. You didn't need to be dependent upon their upgrade cycles, et cetera, right? That was the premise.
Right.
And it cost these companies some money in market value, right?
Cost them a lot of money in market value. Cost them what, almost $300 billion in lost market value in a day? Something insane like that. But to me, it's like such a knee-jerk reaction to so many people. They hear AI and all of a sudden, oh my God, this business is going to end and I need to sell, 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 sell. And I think it's epically premature.
Yeah, I think I agree to a point that we're not about to see all of these software as a service companies wiped out by every one of their customers creating their own software with AI. Most of them don't have the wherewithal to do it. There's not a good business case to do it for a lot of them. But I do think I would submit, and tell me if you agree with this. I'd submit that there's two different segments of companies that might be more prone than not to getting rid of some of their software as a service vendors and implementing something, right? And I think they fall into, to me, two categories. Category number one would be those customers that just have really basic needs. And for a lot of them, maybe the SaaS that they're paying for is overblown, overfeatured, and overpriced, given how fundamental their needs are. And then at the other end of the spectrum, I think there are those companies that truly have really specialized business processes, really specialized requirements, where it's been painful for them to adapt their business to the forced model and process of software as a service companies, and they just aren't getting what they want because they are so unique. But I think for the bulb of companies in the middle, it probably will continue for a while to make sense just to use a SaaS vendor. You could spend your time on other things.
I agree I agree to a point, and I really think it depends. And you have to make it's like, look, any business decision, you need to make a business case. So if you're squoze into a CRM system and you're a big organization, you say you have, I don't know, 100,000 employees, and all of a sudden you want to build your own, solution. Okay, fine, I get that. Let's look at that problem. But you have to look at the cost, and I don't mean the cost of from beginning to end. The cost of getting off and migrating your data to whatever it is you're building, the maintenance, disaster recovery, the people that are associated with it, so you have to assess all those costs before you go ahead and do it. The fact that if you have sensitive data like HR data in the cloud, now you're dealing with all the security requirements that go along with that and everything else. So I think you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. I think even in the case of a smaller organization, it doesn't have the ability to manage their own applications and doesn't know how to deploy in the cloud and can probably not even spell cloud, but now they're going to be forced to learn all of this, even for a small org. You got to look at the costs, and it's not always a cut and dry, I think, thing. And you have to take everything case by case by case and try to understand what it is that you're trying to achieve by building your own. And like you said, I think there are totally legitimate cases for building your own, where your business is truly unique and a unique solution, and then maybe it does make rational sense.
Right. So you raise a really good point, which is that when you're paying for software as a service, you're paying for far more than just the functionality that the app gives you. Whether you think about it or not, you're paying for the fact that someone else is managing security. They're managing resiliency and backups and technical risk and all of these other things, right? You're not thinking about multi-zone configuration and having a, hot zone, cold zone backups. You're just signing up and it works because you've outsourced all of that non-functional stuff to the vendor as well.
It's like insurance. So you're amortizing the risk across a large risk pool. It's no different. You're amortizing the cost against a larger pool of people who are sharing the service. So you're not paying for a full-time CISO. You're sharing that CISO who's going to be take care of your security across 500 other companies, and it makes a big difference in costs.
I will say, just to play devil's advocate, that there are some people who would say, yeah, but if I'm on a well-known software vendor and they get hacked, if there's a breach, my data is at risk. If I'm running my own stuff in my own cloud, no one even knows who I am. No one's going to target me. As long as I've got good security, I feel safer.
I think that's somewhat naive from their point of view. Yeah, yes, you can make that argument as well. I don't disagree with that. I look at it as if I'm sitting on a cloud provider or a SaaS solution, I'm getting the benefit of a much larger pot of money to deal with security than I'm ever going to spend on security. And how often it is when I'm writing code, if you're not really good at writing code, you're going to develop code, and this is a good one that I just came across, I got to bring up. You're writing code that could possibly be full of security holes, even with these tools, if you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, I was going to raise that the biggest failure of AI generated applications tends to be security, right? It's just the models haven't yet learned to develop good security frameworks and architecture and things like that.
And they're really good at reverse engineering other people's security holes. So there was recently it was one in the news that I saw not too long ago, where there was a vacuum, one of those remote AI vacuums that are in your house.
Okay.
And it was it wasn't one of the ones that we know. It was a Chinese manufacturer that had actually done it and had an iPhone and Android app. So app wasn't sophisticated enough for one of the users. He was really good at coding and using the the code development tools. He turned it on. It found all the ports that it was using in the phone app, and subsequently, what it found out was the encryption key, was the same key for 7,000 vacuums. So when he wrote the app, he now had visibility into 7,000 homes, and since these devices have cameras on them, he can see in everybody's house.
He knows the layout of the house. He knows what's in what room. He knows when people are home.
Exactly.
Wow, that's terrifying. Terrifying.
Look, you get a lot of these manufacturers who are creating these products for your house. And remember, this was the whole big thing not too long ago with all the cameras in the house. A lot of them are improperly secured. And there's a whole website actually dedicated to finding these devices, and hacking into people's houses. So again, my point is, you got to be careful. It's never quite as simple. And this is where experience and domain knowledge and everything else, plays an enormous role in this. And you're not just going to take a developer 40 years of experience and replace it with a 20-something vibe coder. That is not going to happen. I mean, maybe something will work, but you're taking your business in your own hands with that.
It's really fascinating. I think I'm probably almost as skeptical as you are about where this is going to go, but I also know that a lot of people are going to try anyway, because the attraction of paying less and having more customized functionality it's a great one. In fact,
yeah, it's compelling.
There was an article, a couple of things that came out. One was in Retool. They did a survey and found that 35% of the enterprises they surveyed, and these are enterprise customers, have replaced at least one SaaS tool with a custom-built tool in which they used AI to help develop that tool. So that's, I don't think we're going to see the big software vendors get kicked out. I think it's going to be these other little tools that do limited things that are maybe not so mission critical.
Right. No, I agree. Look, I think they're going to all coexist together, and there's obviously a place for all the AI coding tools out there and creating applications, and it is going to take up a massive space. But again, I always, you and I are pretty balanced in how we, when we speak to people about all of this stuff. If there's a business case, and it's got to be a legitimate business case, then you do it, and then you use tools to accelerate the process. What is good is if you make that jump and you decide that you have to make that jump from SaaS to internally developed, the cost of developing is going to come down because the tools do, in fact, make it less expensive.
Right.
Do that
the mathematics of that decision are different than they were 5 years ago, for sure.
Oh, even a year ago. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think you need to look at the cost. Look at everything. Don't just look at, I got a tool, I'm developing a tool, boom. That is a fraction of the costs.
So that's a very good point. Let me tell you the leading categories that this study found were the categories of tools where these companies had attempted to replace a SaaS tool with a custom developed tool. Give me your reaction to this. I don't find much of it very surprising, although I see one of them, maybe it's a surprise. So they were workflow automations. So that's like the Appians of the world, right? Okay.
Makes sense.
Next is internal admin tools.
Yes.
Yeah,
I see that.
That's
Makes
where
sense.
a lot of those low-value tools were. Project management.
Yeah, I can actually see that also. Yes, I can definitely see that, and that will probably change over time.
You and I've struggled with some of the dominant project management tools out there, we don't love them.
I mean, come on. I honestly, look, you and I have been doing this for a long time. I have not found a good project management that I love. How many times, I hate to say, I'm relying on a pad. And I know for really large projects, that's not the most efficient thing in the world, but I haven't found a tool out there that's actually really good.
Yeah. The next category is CRM, or customer relationship management tools.
That surprises me a bit more because there are so many good CRM tools out there that are very powerful and not terribly expensive.
Yeah, but there's a lot that are very expensive. Like it depends again on what part of CRM you're talking about, right? Because if you're there's
Yes.
tools like HubSpot and Salesforce, and but as you grow a company, they can get pretty expensive.
And there are also open source versions of those as well. So, I mean, I guess it's
Yeah,
fair to look, especially for CRM, there's been a lot of open source applications out there for a very long time that are actually quite powerful. So, yeah, it's like I would rather take that and fork an open source model and go from there. And the tools make it easy
yeah.
to do that now since they can interrogate the entire code base and they could
Well,
help
that's
you make
interesting.
changes
I
to it.
wonder. I wonder. I'd love to know how many of the companies that said that they did this with a custom build actually started with open source, used AI to interrogate it, understand it, and then fork it and create their own version of it. That's
Yeah,
actually
I mean,
great.
yeah, well, because look, I'm sorry, a CRM tool, it seems simple, but it's not as simple as you think it is on the outset. It's more than a contact database. There's a lot of information you could capture in a CRM tool, and if you're smart, there's an awful lot you can do with it.
And the last category, which sort of dovetails with CRM, is customer support, and I can see that one too, because what you
Oh yeah,
need in a customer support tool is so specific to what your products and services that you're offering your customers are. And
yeah,
yeah,
that makes sense to me. These to me are tools that add value. Maybe one we can question CRM a little bit, but you're adding value to your organization that is unique to your organization. So I could totally see replacing a help desk with some of these tools and doing it the right way and getting that level of customized. I can't speak today. You know what I'm saying?
so it's also interesting if we talk about like the customers, the other end of the spectrum, the highly customized needs where companies just have very specific requirements. One analyst firm, concluded that AI offers a third option between buy and build, which is you can build software that fits your process precisely from day one, but you haven't done the traditional buy versus build work. You haven't done a build in the traditional way.
But there's something about that comment I don't particularly like, and it always bothers me. It's like
It's
you're doing it.
reductivist, right?
Yeah, and we can build tools to fit our process, and that to me always seems backwards. Like in most businesses, I think fall into this. Well, we have a process, therefore the process is the process is the process, and it will never change the process. We have to build, even though if the process is dysfunctional, which in many orgs that is highly dysfunctional because usually they evolve over time, and you know what happens to processes that evolve over time, and they never take the opportunity to fix the process and then figure out what the software should look like.
Yeah. Look, I think you just nailed it. It's maybe there's times when you should change the process. And if AI tools make it too easy to say, oh, we're just going to build our own tool to automate the process as it is today, and we're not ever going to go back and redesign this process, that ultimately is a terrible idea in my book, right? Like you should
Absolutely.
periodically reassess and redesign these processes.
You know what happens. Big organizations, there are people whose careers are built around this stuff, and getting them to change is, I'm sorry, it just becomes an effort and futility. You just never get it done unless it comes down from the top.
And there's this idea for me of like process inertia, which is, a fancy way of saying, oh, that's the way we've always done it. We don't want to change, train
Oh,
people.
we don't want. Why would we do something crazy like that and make it
Yeah.
better for our customers and go faster? We have a process. We got to follow the process, and it's as we have discussed many times, getting humans to change is painfully difficult.
Well, what would you do then if you were a software as a service company, right? And by the way, like whether or not you and I think this is going to be a long-term real alternative at big scale for software as a service, the market seems to think so in a sense, and we both know the market is not always thinking through all the implications of this, but like the market thinks so. As of recently, the total wiped in value across software as a service companies was over $285 billion in market value wiped
Oh,
out
really?
by fear about AI coding replacing software as a service. There's all these stats we gathered. Gartner is probably the most pessimistic on this that I saw, saying by the year 2030, 35% of point product SaaS tools are going to be replaced by AI agents or absorbed into someone else's larger ecosystem. So they're kind of predicting a bloodbath in this market. What would you do if you were a software as a service vendor? How would you what would you do to other than just educating your customers on all of the other things you're doing for them besides just providing the software and the functionality? Are there things you would do at a technical level or product level?
Look, I think there are always things you can do at a product and technical level if you're a software as a service provider, and clearly enhancing your product and making it so compelling that the cost of getting off doesn't make any sense. I think embedding AI in these applications is obviously critical. You need to accomplish that. That to me is without a shadow of a doubt. You need to do that. Maybe it's also streamlining your existing processes, and maybe it's even your whole development cycle. You're changing everything with some of these tools. I think a lot of things you can do to build a bigger moat around your business model. I don't agree with going on this for a nanosecond. I don't think it's going to accelerate that fast, and people are magically going to start deploying agents all over the place. I think they're missing they're missing a lot of critical information. And that building systems, even simple systems, there's a level of complexity there. And the last thing you want to do if you're an employer is have a million agents running around, each with their own schemas and database schemas trying to talk, because I don't see that happening. There is a lot of complexity. There's a cost associated with that as well. And as well as I do, the cloud costs can get really high, really fast if you're not careful about this. And I know cloud providers probably love this. Yeah, deploy more stuff to the cloud. That's great. Write your own code. That's great. Let's proliferate because we just make more money on compute. I'm sure they love all that.
Who wouldn't?
Reality is, I know.
Yeah, I agree. I think if I were doing this, the other thing I would want to do is I would say, look, let's try to allow our customers to enhance our software with AI, not replace it with AI. So to me, that means a couple of really pragmatic things. One is I would have really robust, well-documented APIs or command line interfaces, right? Give someone's AI code a way to work with my product instead of just having to replace it. But let me retain control over the database and the fundamental business rules and the enforcement. And then put in a lot of exit points. Put in a lot of places where as a customer, I could say, you know what? Okay, now I want to AI generate my own little routine that does this piece of the work. But that routine becomes a step in the process that's still orchestrated by my SaaS software.
So I love your thought process here, and it totally escaped me to even do that. But I think that actually makes a ton of sense. And I might even take that a step further, is allow them to run their own agents within your platform and let them code their own agents up. But like I said, some really clearly defined, exit points and egress and
It's a great point. So, I love that. I was thinking more of static exit routines, but I think agents is great. And so that means to me that you want your software to be able to emit or publish a lot of event signals that an agent could listen for and know when to do something, right? So there's a little bit of a, dare I say, a fundamental architectural adaptation that I think the software vendors need to make, that they want to be agent friendly or AI friendly.
But I like the idea of being agent friendly, which implies AI friendly. And look, take it even a step further. If I as an organization want to maintain some of my own information as part of this process, let them integrate closer with my other apps. Or even we have spoken about this at the beginning with all the agent stuff, allow it to communicate with other SaaS platforms more elegantly or easily, I think is another big selling point. So you're opening it up so that they can integrate some of these platforms a lot easier.
No, I think that's exactly right. I love that idea. And I think that the advantage of being agent friendly is that software package, the SaaS package, can retain a level of governance and control, right? Because agent friendly, but you could enforce that the only actual rights to the database go through the package, and the package can still do validations and controls and integrity checks, etc. So you could sort of do that in a way that you're saying, hey, we're going to let you customize to your heart's content, but we're going to protect you by ensuring that the reads and writes for the database, for example, or certain types of things have to go through this core logic with all its guardrails and all its protections. That could sort of be the best of both worlds.
And I like that idea. I think also, if you let's take this a little further down the path. If I'm a business user within one of these organizations and I have an idea of how to use some of this information within one of these SaaS platforms. Let me write my own agent. Let me deploy my own agent. Give me
100%.
the security, the security profile that I need to do what I want to do, and let me run it. And if it's outside of your platform, but I'm using your information and your APIs, go crazy. I think that's
100%.
totally suitable.
I think to me that would be a huge part of making it agent friendly and allowing people to spin up different agents. The other thing that I would be looking at if I were running one of these SaaS companies would be the integration challenge, right? And the fact that you still got to figure out how to integrate with other processes. Most of these companies still haven't cracked that nut in a meaningful way. If I were running a large SaaS company, I would be looking to acquire companies like Zapier or NAN or you name it, maybe Replit, but a lot of the companies that really do process automation and string together different functions, processes, and systems.
I think, and I would even think, I think it's a brilliant idea. I might even take that a step further. Like there are a number of tools out there or platforms for running agents within an organization that put all the layer of control in place so that you can deploy agents and scale them and give individuals the right security access and access to the right data, whatever it may be. And that's also, those two things together, I think really make you a very robust platform for a long time.
Yeah, and if you want to hear a little bit more about one of those, I think you're referring to amongst others our friends at barndoor.ai.
Yes,
right? So
I was. Yep.
A few episodes ago, I don't know how many now, maybe 10, 12 episodes ago, we sat down with the CEO of Barndoor and great conversation about that. And you're right. I think that kind of guardrail framework for agent behavior would be super important to build out this picture that we're talking about.
No, I think they provide a level of functionality. It's an absolute necessity and would make this happen a lot easier.
Excellent. So look, I think you and I figured this out, right? So everyone that sold off your stock in these SaaS companies, maybe you overreacted, maybe you didn't. I don't think these companies are going to go anywhere.
No, buy on the low.
Maybe buy on the low, although neither of us is your investment advisor, nor are we anybody's investment advisor, so don't take our word for it. But I'll be honest, I'm not sure. I think these stocks are going to recover everything they lost, but I don't think it means the end of software as a service. I think there's a little bit of a reset, and they've got to figure out now how to work in this new world.
There is a very knee-jerk reaction in the marketplace today to anything AI related, and you're seeing the volatility. You're seeing a lot of volatility, I think, because of it. And I think
we're going to see this repeat over and over again for the next year, probably, right? Like in different segments of the market.
Oh, 100%. These organizations announcing, job cuts because of AI, and I question that also. And all these things I question hard because I don't think it makes a lot of, when you really peel back the layers and you start asking the hard questions, a lot of it doesn't pass the sniff test.
You got it. Well, Peter, we have a few more minutes left. What do you say to a couple of speed round questions? I'm gonna lob you a speed round question. I've got a couple of them here. I'm gonna tell you about something and love to get your off the cuff thoughts on it. So, the first is sort of we'll call it the AI layoff trap, and this was from Forrester Research published a 2026 prediction article about the future of work, and they said that. Interestingly enough, that they predict that half of all AI-related layoffs, or AI-attributed layoffs, the companies where they said, well, we're deploying AI, we don't need so many people doing this, that nearly half of those people are going to be quietly rehired, either in their original location at a lower salary, maybe replaced by different people, so it's not the exact same people being rehired, or offshore. And that a lot of companies have already, at least privately, said that they regret some of the layoffs they've made attributed to AI, that they maybe have cut too deep too soon. What do you think about that? And any reaction to that?
Lots of reaction to that one. I think if you're laying off because of AI right now, you're being very short-sighted. That's my opinion. I think you and I have said this a million times. Those with the domain knowledge are the ones that are going to get the most value out of this. And if you're laying off that because you think software developers are fungible, even with a tool, I think that has always been very naive. I don't, Outsourcing, I'm not a fan. I think, insourcing is always better, but I don't buy we're going to get rid of half our force and everybody's going to be replaced by AI. I do think ultimately all those people are coming back. And I think in some cases they didn't come back and get paid more, if you want to know the truth.
We're dating ourselves again, but I do remember a period in the late 80s and early 90s. I worked with a guy who was in this situation. He'd been laid off as a mainframe developer.
Right.
And a couple of years later, it was actually, ironically, it was a federal agency, and they had to hire him back as a contractor, and they paid him triple what they were paying him as an employee because
you told me the story, yes.
They got rid of all these people who knew assembly programming on a mainframe, and he literally could name his price.
You know what?
The Resolution Trust Corporation, the RTC, back in the day when we were bailing out savings and loans companies.
And you know what? I think the exact same thing is going to happen, because if I let a developer go out the door who's got, say, 10 years of, domain knowledge working in my business, I always, it's so bottom line focused to think you're going to take that role, outsource it, give them a tool, and replace what he knew. It's just not going to happen. It's borne out a million times. And
I just had a thought that, based on what you said, I just had a thought that I wish I were the kind of person who tweeted or X'd or whatever one does, but I'm not. I never will be. But if I did have a Twitter account, I would say AI may have skills, but it doesn't have knowledge, especially not institutional knowledge, right? And you can't confuse skills with knowledge, right?
But that's all over the place. There was a write-up somebody had put in LinkedIn not too long ago where, the big, and it kind of made its rounds on, even hit some of the news on TV about, this big apocalypse and all these jobs. I'm like, no. That's not the case. Because you give it, and I'll always say this, a fool with the tool is still a fool. And you still need knowledge. And you need really good, powerful domain knowledge if you want to get the most out of the tools. If you think you're going to, and this goes back to all the people who think that outsourcing remotely is going to ultimately be good, because then you're going to find out rapidly that giving your business functionality to people who know nothing about your business is generally a really bad idea.
I couldn't agree more. All right, you ready for the next lightning question?
Go for it.
All right, we'll do one more here. This one is pretty interesting. It's about sort of the irony inflicting Gen Z. So again, this comes from Forrester. They partnered with some other folks, and they did a study on what they're calling the artificial intelligence quotient, the AIQ, instead of just your IQ. So we have an IQ, we have an EQ, and now we have an AIQ. And the AIQ is supposed to measure your readiness to work with AI. Not surprisingly, they found that Gen Z, amongst all the demographic groups, has the highest native AIQ. The number that they cited was 22%. I don't know what 22% means. That's just an arbitrary number. But baby boomers, at the other end of the spectrum.
No, we're Gen X. We're not baby boomers. We're Gen X.
Good. Okay, I'll take that. Yeah. I can never remember which I was. So baby boomers were rated a 6% readiness instead of a 22%. So Gen Z, if you believe the study, far more ready to work with AI. But here's the cruel irony they cited. But the jobs are disappearing. They can't get jobs. The workforce isn't hiring people in entry-level jobs because they're all sitting around waiting to see whether they can avoid permanently hiring these people because they're going to deploy AI.
Yeah, you're right. I know.
So, what do you think of companies that are avoiding hiring this generation that might be more capable of working with AI than any other? Is that a smart move or a short-sighted move, to borrow your terminology?
I'll reiterate my terminology. Incredibly short-sighted move. Look, you need the next generation. You need to be training the next generation. And I think it's crazy that you're not including them in this process, because they're the ones that are going to get the most out of these tools ultimately with the right knowledge. I'd take a Gen Z person with, a good amount of business experience that they've learned on the job with these tools. They'll be wildly efficient. I mean, I see in our generation, Gen X, with these tools, because we have so much domain knowledge, how efficient you and I could be. And this is not native to us. This took us time to transition, but give this to a 20-something, Gen Z, oh my God, that'd be wildly efficient.
But I think what's interesting to me too is that 20-something Gen Zer needs to be partnered with another employee who has institutional knowledge and domain knowledge. Like together, they're kind of unstoppable. If you could say, hey, take your skills at AI and my wisdom and experience from having done this job, and one, you get a better outcome in terms of creating AI solutions, but two, that becomes a very effective way to train the next generation of workers, because
100%.
By co-designing a solution with someone who has that experience, right? Like, I don't know why we're not all doing that already.
Because I think organizations are looking for the easy way out. They're thinking that they can give these tools to people and then magic's going to occur. They're not going to need people anymore. They don't need to train people anymore. And honestly, I think that is, it's not reality.
We all want the easy button, people. Right?
And there is no easy button.
Here's the weird thing about human nature when it comes to AI. And I know you and I have said this many times. It's so frustrating because if you think you're going to get an easy button, it makes a task take 5% as long as it used to take, right? 95% of the effort goes away. And then I say to you, I'm sorry, Peter, I don't have the 95% efficiency easy button, but I've got this 70% efficiency easy button. So it's going to take you 30% as much time as it took you. Yeah, I know you hoped it would take you 5% as much time, but it's going to take you 30%, but you're still saving 70%. Most people, once they thought they were going to get the 95% reduction effort and you offer them a 75% reduction,
they reject it.
They turn their nose up at it. They're like, no, I don't want that.
I know. No, which
it's
is
still a
baffling
70% reduction. And the reality is, if you could get a 20% reduction in effort, you should do it.
20% of is a dramatic change in efficiency and money, and I don't know why people reject it outright. It's mind-boggling to me, and it goes back to you and I again. We've lived through a lot of these management changes, and the whole thing for outsourcing. It was going to revolutionize the development, yada yada yada. And I feel like that same mindset still exists. They're just viewing this as rather than people outsourcing, we're going to outsource to a tool, and all of a sudden things are going to get better, and that is so not the case.
You know what? On the Jetsons, I never saw George Jetson refueling his flying car, right? So if someone comes and offers me a flying car and they said, but there's a catch, once a month you're going to have to refuel the flying car, I'm still taking the flying car. But people are turning it down today because it isn't perfect. It's crazy.
Yeah, there's what's the old saying? Don't let the enemy of good kill.
Don't let perfection be the enemy of good.
Yes,
is that right?
That's exactly it. Yeah, no, I think that's it. That's it. And that's true, I think, for a lot of organizations. And, you'll see, look, we've had these conversations where we'll have professionals reject a lot of these tools outright, thinking, well, it's not perfect. I'm like, well, you're not perfect either. And this is, 100 times better than you are. So because it's not, absolutely perfect, you're going to reject a tool that's going to make you a lot better at your job and save you tons of time. And that's it seems to be a common retort. I'm like, I just, that doesn't compute in my head. I don't get that.
An AI tool doesn't have to be perfect if it's substantially and measurably better than the human performance on the same task. Seems like a pretty
it's an easy win to me. I mean, to me, it's just like, well, I'm rejecting it because I don't want to say that I have this. I want to keep my job, or whatever it may be.
Well, and maybe that's the bottom line on this is these decisions right now are not purely technical and financial and rational. There's all sorts of human emotions and expectations and fear and other things wrapped up in this. And so, we're just not making purely rational decisions, but hey, we're humans and maybe we never will make them. I don't know.
No, humans are inherently irrational, I think, most of the time. Who knows? It's all people problems. It always is. If it wasn't for people, we'd be doing great.
If it wasn't for people, the world would be such an easy place to live in.
Yes.
Well, hey, Peter, we have had yet another, I think, fascinating discussion. I've learned a lot, as I always do when we talk about this stuff. Thank you for indulging our conversation on the future of the SaaS industry.
Thank you, David. It's always a great discussion. I think we always embark on interesting questions that will at some point get answered.
Yeah, and thank you for joining us on the All In on Data podcast. I would love to hear, I'm sure there's things we said that some of you out there disagree with strongly. You think we're just idiots for saying it. I'd love to know what those are. If you agree with us, of course, I'd love to know what we got right, too. So send us your thoughts. And,
Yeah, no, definitely. But again, thank you everybody for listening and making us successful.
All right. See you on the next
There you go.
episode, Peter. Take
Absolutely,
care.
Debbie. You have a great day. Bye now.
Bye, everyone.